I would like to talk today about conventional and ultimate truth in Buddhist thinking. Sometimes you will hear Buddhists say things that, or students say things that seem to be a bit inconsistent, that our ordinary reality is unreal in some sense or not substantial. And there is an extent to which that's true. However, in Buddhist thought, there is conventional and ultimate truth, two aspects of the same thing. Now, what constitutes conventional truth and what constitutes ultimate truth? Well, conventional truth is the way we perceive things through our limited senses and the way our cognitive processes are ordered, and that's limited to that. Now, if I were sitting here with, a cat sitting next to me, and the cat and I were looking at the same object, we would both see the object, but the cat would see it in a very different way than I would, because a cat doesn't have full color range of vision, for one thing. Its eyes are different. It also has a much better sense of smell. It can see ultraviolet light, which I can't. And its evolutionary development looks at things that move, that might be either a predator or prey. That is the way it's geared. Whereas mine is very different. I have language, and language constitutes a great deal of what I perceive as reality. Now, does that mean that there are two independent objects out there, and one of us sees one and then the other, a cat, sees something else? Does it mean that we're both deluded? Well, in terms of conventional truth is true insofar as we perceive it the way we are conditioned to perceive it and the way our senses record it. But that is not the thing's ultimate truth. That escapes us because we don't see it in terms of its ultimate nature. We see it locked in a moment of time when it actually exists, not independent of other objects, but in interdependent origination from the Buddhist standpoint. So let's use an example of a mirage, if we would. Now, we see a mirage out there. Now, several people see the mirage, and they believe that it's water, because that's what it looks like to us visually, and don't really understand the physics and the ocular part of it that gives us the impression that there is water there when it really is not. It's just water reflected through some other process. So that's conventional truth. But let's say you understand exactly what a mirage is. You've seen them before. You understand what they are. You look at them and say, okay, well, that's a mirage. There's not really water there. Well, that's much closer to ultimate truth because you're perceiving it much closer to the way it is. And we as human beings are always going to perceive things through our own isolated perspective. Now, the question that some people would ask is is there really an independent thing out there that is independent of my thinking or my mind? Well, from a Buddhist perspective, and from one of the major Buddhist schools, the in-mind only school, the only thing we can perceive is the process in our mind. It's in our mind that we perceive things. So whether or not it exists independently of that is always going to be eternally irrelevant. That's the way we perceive things. We perceive them in their mind. This could be called a kind of idealism. And it certainly could be interpreted as that. And I'm not one to say that if you want to call it that's perfectly accurate. I wrote a foreword for a book called Materialism is Baloney by Bernardo Castro, who is a contributor to Scientific American, a very highly intelligent and deep thinker, who is indeed an idealist. And if I were to be pinned down, I would say from a Western philosophical standpoint, that's probably closer to what I am too. Now, we know from quantum physics, or what quantum physics seems to present to us. I hesitate to use tells us, because this is not a science. Quantum physics doesn't tell us anything. It just gives us information. But from what we understand, that on the quantum levels, things don't behave anywhere near what they do on this level, a macroscopic level. Things can't be in two places at once. But again, in the electron, in the orbit of an electron, and then you have, the quantum enigma that we have to deal with, which of course also implies that the thought process or mind or consciousness is inherently involved in what happens on the subatomic level. So there are two kinds of realities, two truths, you might say. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because suffering, dukkha in Sanskrit, the primary element that keeps us from seeing things as they are, is based on a very isolated view of the world, that we are independent of everything we perceive. That's not the case from a Buddhist perspective, at any rate. And there is no getting around this dilemma in regards to Zen training, for instance, Zen Buddhism. You cannot be a nihilist, and a nihilist in the sense of thinking that you're what we call an ontological reductionist or a scientific materialist, that everything is made up of component parts, but these component parts are random and not connected in any sort of formal way metaphysically. It just isn't what a Buddhist isn't the Buddhist position. So if you hold that position, that's fine. You can call yourself whatever you like. You can call yourself a Buddhist or a Taoist, or you can call yourself a praying mantis. It doesn't matter. But it is not a traditional Buddhist position. Now, I've talked about atheism before, and technically speaking, of course, all Buddhists are non-theists. That is, they take no stance on theism. Some could go far to say they're a Buddhist atheist. There's been books written about that, but it's kind of pointless. It's like saying I'm a football player that plays with footballs. Okay. It's good for selling books, I guess, but it doesn't mean much. Now, there are much mythology in Buddhism, and mythological beings And I say mythological in the sense that they're part of the Buddhist experience and part of the myths that come down to us. I do not mean in the sense that they're false, because they're neither false nor they're not false. Kind of like quantum physics. Because the way you perceive them gives them their reality, in a sense. Jung liked to use the term archetype. And I think in many cases, just like the pre-Christian gods were archetypes of the mental state and spiritual state of the individual European tribes, so is the case with Buddhist bodhisattvas and so on. When you practice for a long time in any sort of discipline, like Zen or even analytical Jungian analysis or tantric Buddhism, and even in the Hermetic tradition in the West, using visualizations and scrying and so on, you find oftentimes that there's a kind of synchronicity that builds between your thoughts, your dreams, your mind, and the outside world. Now, people would say, well, it's coincidence, or they will say that it's a magical production on the part of the individual or of the gods who work through them, or the bodhisattvas, whatever. But what it's actually telling you is that your mind is opening to a different level. Doesn't necessarily mean that the things that you find coincidental, or I should say synchronous, are anything more than a symbol of your growing unity of your preconscious and your conscious. I don't like to use the word unconscious. I like to use the word preconscious. And that I could go into in another lecture. So, where are we at? Because I'm going to go much deeper into this in further talks. Two kinds of truth. There is regular, ordinary, conventional truth. You can't ignore that in the conventional world. You are an animal, a byproduct of an evolutionary process. If you ignore reality and step in front of a truck, that'll be it. On the other hand, if you think that whatever your view of the world is, or your understanding of the world is complete and fixed, you need more practice. Because when you get a glimpse, or when it opens up this ultimate reality, this ultimate truth, you will see things in a very different manner. You will see their interconnectedness. Now, there's a lot of strife and a lot of anger going on in the United States right now. A lot of tribalism, as people are identifying with one point of view or another. But I would remind everyone, these are the two truths meld into this, that we're all finite and mortal in every respect, and that things do change. They change by their very nature. When we're going on through all this and about the future of the country, that implies the knowledge that they think there will be a future of the country. That, I don't know, that Yellowstone might blow up, or a plague might sweep through the country, or aliens might invade and decide that we're not fit to be here. A highly unlikely circumstance, but the point is that things always change. Look at the ancient civilizations. Every one of them is gone, or there's some remnant of it left from ancient Egypt to ancient Rome to China, and particularly here in the Americas, the great civilizations in Mesoamerica. They no longer exist, although the people do. So when you look at things like that, you see that it's not something to get terribly worked up about. The only thing we should do is look at the world as it is and try to deal with it as it is. If you're feeling anger or rage, you're being dysfunctional. All rage and anger is really fear. What's to be afraid of? Well, you could be afraid of everything, or you could be afraid of nothing. Look at things calmly and think about the true truths. Do a little investigating. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that might give you some interesting insight. Of course, mine comes from my perspective. You don't want to accept this, that's perfectly fine, but it might give you some ideas, and ideas are always good. So this is ShZenshin Roshi, and I hope to talk to you again soon. I know I've been gone for a long time for those people who follow me, but I'm going to try to make an effort to come on and speak a little more often on these things. And if you have questions, you can leave them in the comments box. I don't have time for, abusive comments one way or the other. If you disagree with me, you can just say it politely. But anyway, the best to you all, and I hope that you all attain a clear mind and a happy heart.